Donald Trump's completely incompetent coronavirus advisor, Dr. Scott Atlas, has now suggested that, you know what, maybe people should just go ahead and have the big indoor Thanksgivings this year, because it might be the last Thanksgiving for lots of people anyway. Now, I read the headline and I thought, this can't be true. It can't actually be that bad. Let me look at the video. I then watched the video, and it's even worse than the headline. When you actually see the complete disregard for human life, the complete lack of empathy, the complete lack of understanding, the video is worse than the headline. Let's take a look. And just as a reminder, who the hell is Scott Atlas? Scott Atlas is the doctor that when Trump pushed Fauci out from being sort of publicly part of his inner coronavirus circle, appearing with him at press briefings and the like, when Fauci was pushed out, Scott Atlas was brought in. Now, Scott Atlas is not an epidemiologist. He's not an infectious disease doctor. He's not a pulmonologist, an immunologist. He's a radiologist, and he has become Donald Trump's top guy on coronavirus. Why? Because he'll simply go along with anything Donald Trump says. Take a look at this.
They're suffering from with isolation. Yep. And this kind of isolation is one of the unspoken tragedies of the elderly, who are now being told, don't see your family at Thanksgiving. For many people, this is their final Thanksgiving, believe it or not. What are we doing here? I think we have to have a policy, which I have been advocating, which is a whole person, whole health policy. It's not about just stopping cases of COVID. We have to talk about the damage of the policy itself. So what does the federal government do? It's what I've advised.
So that is a neuroradiologist advocating for things. What? This guy is just disgusting. And you know, when I want to talk about infectious disease, I don't typically think to call a radiologist. This is no offense to radiologists. We have a handful of radiologists in our audience that I know about. We probably have more radiologists in our audience that I don't know about. Two of them actually emailed me and they said, David, you know, I don't find it offensive when people say, why the hell is a radiologist up there on Trump's coronavirus task force so prominently? They wrote to me and said, I'm a radiologist. I have no business dictating public health policy during a global pandemic, period. Why is Scott Atlas doing anything here is question number one. Stanford University, which is where Scott Atlas was a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution before joining Trump's coronavirus team, has already distanced itself from Scott Atlas's comments. Political observers who have some connection to reality have been criticizing Scott Atlas's presence in this group. And what Scott Atlas doesn't seem to be saying is that we might make this Thanksgiving the last one for lots of people if we hold these huge indoor gatherings, which will spread the virus and will kill people who could have otherwise had many more Thanksgivings. Now, it's also sort of strange. Scott Atlas talks about the elderly. Some of these elderly folks might be on their last Thanksgiving, regardless of whether there was a pandemic or not. Remember that the death rate for coronavirus triples for those in their 60s relative to those in their 50s. And then the death rate almost triples again for those in their 70s relative to those in their 60s. People in their 50s, 60s, and 70s often live a long time. Like if you're 59 and you have a significantly higher death rate than those under 50, when he says the elderly might be dying in the next year anyway, is he talking about 59-year-olds? Is he talking about 65-year-olds? Is he talking about 75? Like, what is he even talking about here when he says this may be the last Thanksgiving anyway for lots of these folks who are at higher risk if they contract coronavirus? Delusional, completely delusional. And this is the doctor who has Trump's ear. If you say, well, there's all these different people who are doing good work, Peter Hotez and, you know, Dr. Anthony Fauci and our friend Isaac Bogosh, who's in Canada. I mean, the point is there's so many doctors doing good work and talking sense here. And it's Scott Atlas who has Donald Trump's ear. Once again, it's the worst people. I previously said almost any random American would have better handled coronavirus than Trump. And you might be wondering, well, like, how would a construction worker or an accountant or a preschool teacher or a dental hygienist, like, what do you mean? How would they have handled it better than Trump? Most people would not be so delusionally narcissistic that they would think they know more than doctors. Most people would just say, wow, I'm in charge of the pandemic. Great. What kind of doctors and public health officials and scientists know about pandemics? Let's turn it over to them. And you would end up with a better situation than what we ended up with. Trump did worse than random people by imposing his ignorance and his delusions and his narcissism on the situation. You are seeing the same thing now with Dr. Scott Atlas. Almost any doctor would better handle this. My dentist, who has been my dentist since I was 5 years old, if you put my dentist in charge, my dentist would immediately say, great, let's bring in an epidemiologist. Let's bring in a public health expert. Let's bring in an infectious disease expert, a pulmonologist, a medical whatever. You guys tell me what to do, what to say, and we'll get it done. Any one of the doctors on Joe Biden's coronavirus task force, even oncologist and medical ethicist Zeke Emanuel, would better handle this than the combination of Scott Atlas and Donald Trump. They regularly find the worst people to do the absolute worst things all the time, like clockwork. And remember, one of the selling points about Donald Trump was this is a businessman, sort of like a project manager. He'll hire the best people. He'll put the best people in charge, and it's all going to be fantastic. There were very few even ostensible selling points about Donald Trump. The ones that there were bogus. He's failed on every single one of them, including famously, I will hire the best people and put the best people in positions of power. We will be lucky to now get out of this with under, we're looking at 400,000 Americans dead by February, maybe even more. We will be lucky to keep the numbers that low. And at one point, remember, Donald Trump said, forget about 15 cases will soon be zero. At one point when this was a thing, Donald Trump was saying we might lose 50 or 60,000 people, but it's not going to be more than that. We're looking at 400,000, maybe even 500,000. Let me know where you are on the next 3 months of the virus via Twitter, where you can find me at @Pakman. One of our sponsors is privacy.com. They're giving you $5 when you sign up for their completely free service at privacy.com/Pakman. I've been using Privacy for a little over a year now. You've heard me talk about it before. It's a lifesaver, and here's how it works. Takes just a couple of minutes to set up. Anytime you buy something online or on the phone, instead of actually using your real credit card number, the Privacy app and the browser plugin let you give each company a randomized virtual credit card number that you create out of thin air. It'll even autofill the card number with one click. And the payment is taken out of your checking account without the merchant ever knowing your real information. So this allows you to keep your banking information secure, but also to take control of your finances. You can create up to 12 of these virtual credit cards a month. You can set spending limits. You can freeze them. You can delete them anytime you want. So when you do this, it means you're not going to be charged when you don't want to be, because you can destroy the virtual card number right after using it, which, for instance, I love using free trials because I know I won't be charged when the trial is over if I use a virtual credit card number. You're keeping your identity private by not telling companies who you are. You're keeping your bank or credit card info protected against data breaches and identity theft, and it's free. There's no catch whatsoever. But if you want, Privacy also offers a $10 a month plan that gives you 1% cash back and lets you create 36 credit cards a month, and a $25 a month plan tailored more for small businesses where you can create 60 card numbers a month and much more. But definitely go ahead and at least get started with the free plan. You'll protect your financial info. Companies can't charge you unexpectedly. And like I said, you'll get $5 to spend when you sign up at privacy.com/Pakman.